Now, former President Jacob Zuma is a free man. He's been granted remission together with thousands of other non-violent offenders. Zuma reported to the escort prison yesterday and was released shortly thereafter. This after a court decision that found his medical parole unlawful. We discussed this more with criminal lawyer William Booth. A very good morning to you. William, when we hear phrases from the Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, like non-violent offenders, thousands of them now set to roam the streets of South Africa, does that not set a bad precedent?
Good morning, William. Yes, I must say it could be perceived in that way. One must have a look at exactly in terms of what law the correctional services have released former President Zuma. Now, that section is in terms of our constitution, section dealing with the powers of the president. So what actually happened here, this is a little bit different to what happened previously when Zuma was released on medical parole by the former Commissioner of Correctional Services. That is, the president has agreed to release Zuma and grant him remission or a pardon, along with other prisoners. So obviously that is a power that the president has in terms of our constitution. But how it took place seems to be a little bit odd. Suddenly we have the announcement that there are going to be a release of thousands of prisoners, along with former President Zuma. There's been a lot of criticism of this decision and how it actually took place. So it would be interesting to see exactly the reasons why former President Zuma specifically was released. We don't know the facts and circumstances of the other prisoners, and it is something that happens, that prisoners are released on parole and released on free pardon. But, that this all happens at the same time is, in my view, a little bit odd, and it would be interesting to get more information on the basis why this took place in this particular fashion. We have many instances where prisoners are not released on pardon in terms of that section, or where their sentences are remitted, and in fact others that struggle, who may justifiably be entitled to be released in terms of the section, struggle to be released. Now, you suddenly have this situation where it all happens at the same time. One must also go back and look at what is the criticism of this. Many persons, I think, have correctly pointed out that a court has overturned the medical parole release. Zuma served 2 months. In fact, his sentence was 15 months. And the criticism is, well, if a court imposes a sentence, why is such a large portion of that sentence then remitted and Zuma pardoned? Should he not have served more time? Should he have not have gone in to prison, served a further period of time, and then the correctional services consider his release, looking at all the normal factors that they traditionally look at for the release of a prisoner. So, why has it taken place in this particular fashion? It kind of throws a bit of a doubt on our whole criminal justice system. People are sentenced, should they not serve their full time? Yes, they are entitled to pardon, they're entitled to be released on parole, they're entitled to be released under correctional supervision. He's just been released. There's nothing further. Many people are released in terms of being pardoned, have to then, let's say, do certain periods of correctional supervision where they have to report back to the Department of Correctional Services. They may have to serve some form of community service, etc. But it's just, he gets 15 months and he only serves a period of 2. So I think this particular matter is going to go further. There's various organizations who've said they are going to take this matter on, study the decision, and decide whether or not to take the matter to court. But essentially, it is the president that has pardoned the former president.
And that last part, William, is very imperative because he is the decision maker and the buck stops with him, so to speak. In the context of the remission, what's the likelihood of it being reversed, given that there are organizations who are trying for that?
Well, it's very difficult to say exactly what the chances of success if they go to court. I think there is certainly a reasonable prospect that it could be overturned, but we need to know exactly why the president has, and on what basis, what facts he has released the former president. Now, the former president obviously is still standing trial for very, very serious charges where, if convicted, he could be sentenced to long periods of imprisonment. He's been criticized all over, the whole issue of corruption in South Africa. And people are going to think, well, look, I can go and do what I like, and this is going to be regarded in a fashion as not being too serious. So, it's difficult for me to say, this decision is going to be overturned, as the decision of medical parole was overturned. But it would be very interesting to see what are the facts, what are the circumstances, did the president apply his mind properly, and then look at what were the circumstances of the other prisoners. I am sure all of those others that were pardoned and have now been, or maybe in the process of being released, they have been serving periods of imprisonment longer than 2 months. They are in prison, not just arriving at the prison and then being suddenly released. So the facts as to why it took place in this manner, why it was kind of placed together with all these other prisoners, and specifically, what are the grounds why former President Zuma, why he was released, and in fact served no further time than the 2 months that he had served initially. And yes, the correctional services have the right to consider persons released on parole, but I just want to say, practically, it's a battle to get people released, justifiably people released who should not serve lengthy periods of imprisonment. It's a whole process, and there's sometimes people serve much longer than they should because of practical problems that there are in getting people released from prison.
And of course, William, when we talk about overcrowded prisons in South Africa, this premise existed during COVID, and it was talked about very heavily during that time, but none such decision was made during that time to release thousands of people back into society because of overcrowding. So in itself, in your legal mind, would this create a problem down the line where they could, which could be brought back to the correctional services to say, wait, perhaps you made an error in this move?
Well, I think possibly, but I think also other prisoners who are presently serving short terms of imprisonment, can use this as a precedent and say, well, all these other people, and former President Zuma was released, so why can't I be released? Overcrowding in our prisons has been a problem for years and years and years. Now, suddenly, it's kind of addressed at the same moment that Mr. Zuma is being considered for his release. So it should be applied properly. It should be applied across the line for everybody. And as I said, it would be interesting to see what were the facts surrounding the release of all these other people suddenly at this particular moment. Why wasn't it done, as you say, during COVID, when it was critical with regard to overcrowding, where the disease was spreading in prisons, people were dying in prisons, yet during that time, this was not applied in the same manner as it's suddenly been applied in this particular instance. And I can tell you from a practical point of view, I've had many matters where we've battled to get prisoners out who should justifiably be released, who are not dangerous, who have committed and been convicted of less serious offences, even less serious than President Zuma, because let's be honest about this. You know, what he's been convicted of is, I believe, a serious offence, because it flies in the face of the courts. It flies in the face of orders and rulings that judges have made. And if people don't comply with a judge's ruling, then it is a huge problem, and it affects the whole criminal justice system. So, you know, I would like to see more information about why this all took place now and why the overcrowding situation has not been addressed properly. It really hasn't. We had decisions from the Constitutional Court relating to prisons, the poor conditions in prisons, the way prisoners are being treated. And I'm talking about people who are serving less serious and who are not violent offenders. So, you know, again, we don't want to debate the whole overall of the prison system in this country, but I think certainly it needs to be seriously looked at.
Certainly a lot to think about and question this morning, William. Thank you so much for your time. William Booth is a criminal lawyer talking to us here on the weekend edition of the South African Morning.